Iran has no air defenses. Iran has no air force. Iran has no navy. Their missiles, their missile launchers and drones being destroyed or shot out of the sky. With every passing hour, we know, and we know they know, that the military capabilities of their evil regime are crumbling. We will keep pressing, we will keep pushing, keep advancing, no mercy for our enemies.
We continue to remain centered on our military objectives. These are well defined and include eliminating Iran's ballistic missiles, drones, and naval threats. To date, our Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps aviators have collectively flown more than 6,000 combat flights, demonstrating the unmatched capability of America's joint force as we maintain air superiority over Iranian skies. And to the entire Operation Epic Fury team, keep pushing, remain steady, fight to win. Thanks so much and Godspeed.
The Strait of Hormuz is not a local problem. It is a focal point for the competing interests of every major power on the planet. And when you see 4,500 American troops moving toward it, you are not looking at a regional military deployment. You are looking at a move in a game that spans continents. For the nations of the Gulf region, this deployment lands with a weight that outsiders sometimes fail to appreciate. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built their entire economic futures. Their Vision 2030 programs, their sovereign wealth funds, their infrastructure ambitions, on the assumption that Gulf oil will continue to flow freely to global markets for decades to come. Any disruption to that flow is not merely an inconvenience. It is an existential threat to development models that have been constructed at enormous cost and over generations of political effort. These governments are watching the American deployment with the particular attention of parties who have skin in the game at a level that goes far beyond geopolitical abstraction. They are watching because their futures depend on the answer to the question this deployment poses. Can the United States actually deter Iran from using the Strait as a weapon? Iran, for its part, is engaged in a calculation of its own, and it is a sophisticated one. The Islamic Republic has survived 4 decades of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, military threats, and internal pressure. Its leadership understands deterrence because it has lived inside a deterrence framework for its entire existence. Iranian military strategists are not simply watching the American deployment and asking whether they can defeat it in open battle. They almost certainly understand that they cannot, at least not in a conventional sense. The question they are asking is more precise and more dangerous. What is the cost to the United States of sustaining this deployment, and at what point does American domestic political will falter? What is the escalation threshold? What action, short of direct war, can Tehran take that imposes maximum cost on Washington and its allies while remaining below the line that would trigger a full military response? This is the strategic logic of asymmetric warfare, and the Strait of Hormuz is almost perfectly designed for it. Iran does not need to defeat an American carrier strike group to close the strait. It needs only to create sufficient uncertainty that commercial shipping companies begin rerouting their tankers, that insurance rates for vessels transiting the Gulf spike to prohibitive levels, that the flow of oil slows from a flood to a trickle, a few well-placed mines, an attack on a tanker by forces that maintain plausible deniability, a series of provocative maneuvers by Revolutionary Guard vessels that stop just short of open engagement. These are the tools of a power that knows it cannot win a conventional war, but understands that it does not need to win one to inflict serious damage on the global economy and on American credibility. This is what makes the American deployment so complex to execute and so difficult to sustain over time. Deterrence is not a one-time declaration. It is a commitment that must be continuously demonstrated, continuously resourced, and continuously believed by the adversary you are trying to deter. Every day that American ships sit in the Gulf, the question being asked is whether Washington's resolve is genuine and durable, or whether it is the kind of resolve that fades when domestic politics shifts, when defense budgets tighten, when a news cycle moves on to the next crisis. Iran is watching for answers to these questions not just in the number of ships deployed, but in congressional debates, in press conferences, in the statements of American officials who may signal, intentionally or not, how long this commitment is likely to last. For the global economy, the immediate stakes are almost impossible to overstate. Oil markets are not patient institutions. They do not wait for crises to fully develop before they begin pricing in risk. The moment credible reporting emerged about this troop deployment, traders and analysts began running scenarios. What happens to Brent crude if Iran deploys mines across the Strait's shipping lanes? What happens to Asian manufacturing if tanker transit is disrupted for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month? The answers to these questions are deeply uncomfortable for governments everywhere because they illustrate how thin the margin is between current global economic stability and a serious disruption. Oil prices spiking by 30 or 40% do not just raise fuel costs. They raise the cost of everything that is transported by vehicle, which is nearly everything that modern civilization consumes. They compress profit margins in industries already operating under inflationary pressure. They generate political instability in developing nations whose governments subsidize fuel and whose citizens will take to the streets if those subsidies become unsustainable. Countries in Asia are particularly exposed to this vulnerability. Japan, South Korea, India, and China each import enormous quantities of Gulf oil, and each has built its industrial capacity on the assumption that this supply chain is reliable. Japan imports nearly 90% of its energy needs, a structural dependency that traces back to the decisions made after the Second World War and deepened through decades of industrial growth. South Korea's manufacturing sector, one of the most sophisticated and export-driven in the world, runs on Gulf crude processed at refineries that were designed for exactly this supply source. Any serious disruption to Hormuz transit times does not just raise their energy costs, it forces emergency diplomatic engagement, draws down strategic reserves, and introduces a level of economic uncertainty that markets punish swiftly and without sentiment. European governments, meanwhile, are navigating this moment from a position of particular fragility. The energy crisis that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrated in painful detail how quickly energy security assumptions can be shattered, and how costly the scramble for alternative supply sources can become. European nations have spent billions restructuring their energy import portfolios, building LNG terminal capacity, signing new long-term agreements with suppliers from Norway to Qatar. They are not eager to face a second major energy supply shock within a few years. Their concern about events in the Strait of Hormuz is not abstract geopolitical interest. It is the concern of governments that have already been burned once and cannot afford to be burned again. This is the broader strategic backdrop against which the American troop deployment must be understood. Washington is not simply defending a shipping lane, it is defending the foundational architecture of the global trading system. The assumption, baked into decades of economic planning across dozens of nations, that the free passage of commercial shipping through international waterways will be protected by American power projection.